Welcome to Watch Symposium. I'm Austin, and this is the second custom video for Ed. If you haven't seen part one, link in the description, check it out. But we looked at his essentially perfect three-piece Rolex collection. But it's been about 3 years since he's added a watch. I think he's getting kind of antsy and he wants to add another Rolex. We know from that video that the Daytona is a watch that he's been interested in. And if you look at his current three-piece collection, you can see that there's not a chronograph there. So is it perfect after all? Does it need a chronograph? And would adding a Daytona make it all the more perfect? All right, well, let's get into his email and see what he has to say. I've decided to get back into the hunt for a Daytona, which is better late than never to add, I suppose. And when it comes to Rolex watches, it's always to have added yesterday, but we can't always do that. And so if you know it's a piece that you want, really the desire is not going to wane. The best thing you can do is just bite the bullet and buy it today, because it's not going to get any cheaper. And yeah, it would have been better if you had bought it yesterday, but it's not going to be any better buying it tomorrow. It's just going to make things more expensive. And I think your collection, if it calls for anything, it calls for a Daytona. It calls for a chronograph function. And, you know, it's a beautiful Rolex collection. To keep it Rolex, get a Daytona, I think it would, make it just even more perfect if that's possible. Here's what I'm considering with the prices in USD. A 16520 Zenith, white dial with box and papers for about 28,000 USD. Or the black dial for about 3,000 cheaper at about 25,000 USD. Or a 16523 Zenith two-tone with a black dial, box and papers for about 17,500 USD. Or going with the 6-digit versions, all right, where they changed to the InHouse movement. I want to say that's the caliber 4130. And they started making their own movement and stopped relying on Zenith. 116520 with a white dial, and this would be box and papers at 22,000 USD, or the watch only for 18,000 USD. So box and papers would add about 3,000. I think if you're going to go with a Daytona, you want a complete set, I would splash out and pay 3,000 more for the box and papers. All right. Or instead of the steel version, a two-tone, the 116503 two-tone, white or black dial, new full set for 20.5 thousand, so about 20 or 21,000 USD. And again, that's two-tone. Having watched a bunch of your videos, I reckon you'll be urging me towards a Zenith. The ones shown are for not very rare serials, W and A serials. W's came out in sort of the mid to early 90s, I want to say 94, and A's 1999. And to be honest, while it would be nice for the watch to retain its value, I'm buying it to wear, not as a safe queen. But they're quite pricey now, whereas I'm also trying to balance the fact that I could get a new 116503, albeit a two-tone version, for 20,000 on the gray market, not to mention the decision factors of the other models. I could afford any of these models listed, but I'm also a careful spender and don't want to waste my money. Hence, the 116500 is not in there. And he's talking about the current steel Daytona, because on the gray market, they're going for 20 to 30,000 USD. So at retail, they're going for, I want to say 14. So over twice the price of retail. So pretty crazy money on the gray market. So he hasn't even considered one of those. And he says, if I were to go steel, I prefer the look of the steel bezel anyway. Okay, so no brainer then. Stick to the earlier steel bezel Daytonas. Also, as you can see, I don't own a vintage or neo-vintage watch, nor any 5-digit, and I find the idea quite charming. His decision is Zenith or InHouse movement, steel or two-tone. And the first thing that I would look at is the aesthetics. Do you want to wear a steel watch or a two-tone watch? And you like your Oyster Perpetual, maybe because it's a little bit understated. And I remember that you passed up a chance to get a two-tone bluesy. So I think you're the kind of guy like me that would rather wear a steel piece. It's going to be less eye-catching and more wearable in more situations. And that's the way I would go. That's the way I think you should go. I have a feeling you're considering a two-tone because maybe you think it's a better value proposition, and it is, because you can get a two-tone Daytona for less than a steel version. But when it comes to Rolex watches, Rolex steel is much more valuable than Rolex gold, all right? And I wouldn't let that really affect your decision much. I mean, when you're talking about the 6-digit Daytona, the steel is 2,000 more. That's not that much more. I mean, you're talking about 20,000 USD versus 22. And I would pay 2,000 more to wear the watch I would want to wear, okay? Look, if you like two-tone watches more, I mean, it's a no-brainer. You get less for more, but I wouldn't want to wear a two-tone. I have a feeling you wouldn't either. And so even though it might seem like the smart money, you got to live with the watch. And again, 20 versus $22,000. I mean, that's a $2,000 difference, and it's a drop in the bucket. And I think the steel is going to retain its value more. All right. So I wouldn't consider a two-tone Daytona unless that really is why you're buying it, because it's two-tone, not because it's a Daytona and you can get it cheaper because it's two-tone. You want to buy Daytona that's in two-tone because you want a two-tone watch. You want a two-tone Daytona. And look, your collection could use a two-tone watch. I wouldn't want one in it because I don't roll like that. But some people would say that it would make your collection more diverse, and there's something to be said about that. But if you want to keep on the path of usable steel pieces, then go for the steel version. And I think it's the better value proposition, unless two-tones become really popular in the future, and I don't think they will, okay? But that's for perhaps the viewers to discuss in the comment section. All right, so then you got to decide, do you want to go Zenith or the InHouse? Aesthetics plays a part, but I think this is where collectability comes into play. And the Zenith, I think, is much more collectible, obviously, all right? Now, as far as the aesthetics go, that is a factor because the Zenith Daytonas have indices that are kind of straight, whereas the InHouse 6-digit Daytonas, it's almost like the indices went like this, all right? They just kind of ballooned a little bit. Now, I prefer the indices on the Zenith Daytonas. I think they're beautiful, and I would get a kick out of looking down at my Daytona and seeing those indices. And a lot of people would say, you know, that's such a small thing, but when it comes to Rolex watches, it's all about the little things that can bring you little bits of pleasure here and there. And knowing you have the Zenith Daytona and a very collectible watch, and seeing those subtle visual elements in the indices and the subdials, I would get a kick out of that, and I think it would be worth it. Now, the question is it worth essentially a $5,000 to $7,000 premium over the InHouse movement? Now, if you've got the money, sure. I really think it depends on how much money you've got. I mean, if you're struggling to get a Daytona, you might just settle, all right? But if you don't have to settle, why? And you seem like you have enough money for the Zenith Daytona, so that's probably what I would be looking to get, okay? All right, so I think the Zenith Daytona has those interesting visual elements. It's more expensive, but you got the money, and I think it's going to be a more collectible piece. But you talk about wearability, and really the main point in you getting the Daytona is to wear it and enjoy it. And so you got to ask yourself, which would you enjoy more? Okay, set aside the visual elements of the Zenith Daytona that you might enjoy more. Is the 6-digit InHouse Daytona more wearable? Well, I think no, but yes. A a lot of it's in your mind. I mean, are the two objects comparable in terms of how wearable they are? Yes, absolutely. But how are you going to feel about the Daytona that you paid much more for, that you know is rare, harder to get, much more collectible? Is that going to weigh on you? Are you going to look down at that watch and think, you know, I love wearing it, but I get a little bit anxious. I feel like it should hang out in the safe. You know, I hate to wear and potentially damage such an expensive and collectible watch. Well, that's what you might have to face with the Zenith Daytona. If you just want a wearable Daytona, then the InHouse movement might be a better option. It's going to be cheaper. If it gets dinged up, it's not that big of a deal. You can take it to Rolex to have it serviced. You don't have to worry about mixing and matching tritium parts with Luminova parts. And so if you just want something fun to wear, that's the way to go. But if you can put that out of your head, the fact that the Zenith Daytona is, you know, more collectible, more desirable, is going to be a little bit harder to service. You might want to take it to a third party versus Rolex. If you can get past all of that, then it really is just as wearable as the InHouse movement Daytona. But again, our perceptions play a big part. And if I was looking for a knockaround piece, I probably would say I'm going to pay less for the 6-digit InHouse Rolex because I'm going to have more fun with it. You know, I have a video, and I'll put a link in the description, and it's about how much fun I have with my Explorer 2. And I think it's titled something like why you want to get like a crappy Rolex watch. Okay. And there's a lot to be said for that, because sometimes these watches can be so nice and pristine and collectible that weighs on us, and it takes away from the wearing experience. And so if you can manage that and not let that affect the wearability, I would go with the Zenith movement. But if you think that the fact that you're going to pay more for it, and you know it's going to be more potentially collectible, and it's maybe going to be more finicky when it comes to service time, if you think that's going to be a factor that's going to affect your usability, then you might want to consider the InHouse movement. So there you go. I think we've narrowed it down to a steel Daytona, box and papers, whatever you get, because you got the money. It's better to pay a little bit more for the box and papers, because I think box and papers in the future will pay dividends. It's like a modern piece. Box and papers or watch only, not that big of a deal, but the older you get, the further back you get, the more vital it is, to where if you got a box and papers, you know, 1655, that's gonna up the price a lot, all right? Because as time passes, box and papers, they get lost and things happen to them. And so it'll pay back dividends in the future to get box and papers for your Daytona. So go with that. Guys, let them know in the comments section which you would go for. Knowing myself, I would be better off going with the 6-digit InHouse movement, because I would have more fun with it, because I can't handle potentially collectible watches. I don't have any fun with them, but I would rather have the Zenith. It is indeed a tough question, but ask yourself, will you be able to enjoy the Zenith Daytona? And if so, just as much, that's the way I would go, all right? If you can handle it, unlike me. All right, guys, well, let him know what he should do. Drop a comment in the comments section. Ed, thank you for your custom video request. Guys, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.